At some point, each of us has to decide which voice will be our guide through the wilderness of life. We have to decide to which voice we will listen. In the cartoons, it always seemed easy. There were just two to choose from, one for each shoulder, easily discernible. The good one had a halo, the bad one a pitchfork. So long as the character listened to the haloed one, things would basically turn out well. And frankly, even when they didn't, well, hilarity ensued. The point is, it was simple. A choice for each shoulder, black and white, good and bad, simple. Two choices to choose from. The challenge, of course, is that most of us don't live in a cartoon. Most of us. And the choices we face on any given day are not easily dividable into black and white, right and wrong. No, sometimes it takes a little bit to try and figure them out, to try and discern those voices, those challenges that we face each and every day. Which direction will they take us? We can start off thinking we're going to follow one voice on a given day, only to find ourselves a little thrown off, sometimes in good ways and sometimes not. No, like the sirens of old, sometimes along the path of life, we can hear a voice so convincing, so alluring, that hides their malevolence so convincingly that we turn towards it, often not discovering the danger until it's too late. Until we find ourselves down a path we never intended to go, in a place we never intended to be. Perhaps some of us have been there. Perhaps some of us are there. Friends, what are those voices that you listen to? What do they say? Do they whisper words of encouragement, of grace, of love? Or something else? Do they offer words of encouragement? Do they build you up or tear you down? Are they mostly outside? Or are they within? Some of us, of course, struggle with those internal voices, that gossipy voice that perches in our soul and keeps whispering to us, we're not quite enough, we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not attractive enough. Where did that voice come from? Whose voice do we hear when we hear it? We're not born that way, are we? Sure, everyone's different, but most people have to learn to hate themselves, like the teenager who signs up for Instagram longing for connection only to find her self-worth shackled to the like button. It doesn't take much for that outside voice to move inside. As we know from hard experience, a little negativity can go a long way. And that voice is pernicious. We can hear it once and then struggle to get rid of it our entire lives. We can keep working to let it go. We can have a PhD and still feel dumb. We can find success and still feel inadequate. We can be loved and still feel unworthy. But the good news, friends, is that it's not the only voice out there. The good news is that there are other voices, if we can believe it, voices of love, voices of hope, voices of peace, but it takes a choice to hear them. In other words, friends, we may never be able to get rid of all of those other voices that are speaking into our lives, but we can choose to preference one. We can choose which voice that we're going to listen to. At some point, each person must decide which voice will be their guide through the wilderness of life. Truth be told, we don't know a whole lot about the life of Jesus prior to the start of his ministry. Frankly, we don't even know a whole lot about that. Just 4 tiny books, which basically start in earnest at his ministry. Mark jumps right in, as does John, sort of. Luke tells a little bit about the birth, stops in again at age 12. And Matthew, of course, Matthew talks about going to Egypt and back, but most of them don't start in earnest until one moment, the same one, the moment of baptism. The occasion in which, in 3 of the Gospels, Jesus hears a voice from above. A voice that lets him know he is beloved. Some of us could use the reminder. In 2 of the Gospels, it's in the second person. You are my son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased. Once it's in the third person. This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. But the point is the same in each of them. And just listen to it for a moment. Jesus has not done a darned thing, and yet he is called beloved. He hasn't done anything significant. He hasn't stepped out. He hasn't taught nothing. He has done absolutely nothing. And at the beginning, he is called beloved. There is a reminder of grace in that. Now, maybe he'd heard that voice all his life, or maybe that was the first time. We don't know. All we really know is that in this moment, it struck him enough that it sent him out into the wilderness right away. And we kind of get it, don't we? If we've spent our entire life only hearing one side of the story, if we've spent our entire life listening to that other voice which tells us our worth comes from what we do, from how we look, from the grades we get, it can be hard to hear another voice. And once we really start to listen to it, it can feel like we're out in the wilderness. Jesus, we're told, heads to the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights where he fasted, at the end of which we're told he was famished. Makes sense. Of course, 40 is one of those biblical numbers that just means a long time. It connects him with Moses and Elijah in this moment, but it is out there in that wilderness, after he has not eaten, that he finds himself tempted. That makes sense, doesn't it? It's those moments in our own lives that we find ourselves tempted when we're hungry, when we're angry, we're lonely, when we're tired. Why wouldn't it be the case for Jesus? Now, we mainline Protestants, when we hear this story, all we can really focus on is how many times it says Satan. We're not really comfortable with that. That's one piece we'd just like to gloss over, breeze right past for good reason. But the truth is, friends, we don't have to believe in a literal devil to recognize the temptations that we face each and every day. We don't live in a cartoon. We can't always notice our temptations by the red spandex and pitchfork. That would be a lot easier. No, for us, they're a lot harder than that, aren't they? They're the ones that stand there and try and convince us that we should follow them, that if we only believed in that if we only give our life to that, then we will truly be worthy. Jesus is facing the same thing. In the midst of his uncertainty, in the midst of his deep hunger, he is tempted to take that path more traveled. And we get it. Truth is, we don't have to have been asked to turn stones into bread to recognize what it means to face the impossible. What it means to be asked to do something unachievable and yet still kick ourselves when we can't do it. And we don't have to have faced a leap from the pinnacle of the temple to recognize what it's like to have to prove our worth in extraordinary ways, in ways that other people never have to prove. That seems particularly important at the beginning of this Women's History Month to remember. And let's just be honest, most of us don't have to look past our own pockets and that device which demands our constant attention to recognize something that promises us the world if only we will bow down to it. We know what it's like to be tempted. And with each temptation, Jesus had a choice. Would he follow that siren call no matter the danger ahead, or would he keep listening for that voice he heard in his baptism, that voice he was struggling likely to believe, that same voice that spoke to us in our baptism, that promise of grace, that there's nothing you can do or say to lose the love of God, that our worth does not come from what we do, but from who we are. We face the same choice each and every moment, each and every day. To what voice will we listen? Lent is about offering each other the possibility of another voice, of pausing long enough to hear those other voices, to really stop, turn inward, and think about what are the voices I'm allowing to speak into my life, and are they offering me anything? And if not, to let them go. Or at least listen for something else. For that voice that has been whispering in your ear since before you were formed in the womb. The one that has crawled deep down and been there through every wrong thing you've ever done and every good thing you've ever done, through every high and low, through every good and bad, through everything in your life. It has been there whether you've been able to hear it or not. That voice, the same one that spoke to Jesus, "You are my child, the beloved. With you I am well pleased," before we ever did anything. The promise is there for us. So maybe you've never heard it, in which case, hear it now. You are, as I am, a child of God. Young and old, black and white, gay and straight, male and female, rich and poor, broken and whole, Republican and Democrat, everywhere beyond and between, you are, as I am, a child of the living God. Not because you did anything to earn it, but by virtue of your very being. There are other voices out there. But make no mistake, only one that leads to life. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind. But now I see. We may not be able to get rid of all of those other voices in our lives. But we can choose to listen to a different one. Friends, at some point, each person has to decide which voice will be your guide through the wilderness of life. Amen.